Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Arthur Kanegis. Arthur is the director and producer of The World is My Country, about the amazing adventures of world citizen number one, Garry Davis. Arthur has directed and produced many other films. He's also a radio host, a journalist, and a writer. Arthur, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be on your show.
So, Arthur, I have to be honest with you. I didn't know who Garry Davis was until last week. And I'm just surprised I didn't know who he was, considering that he has, I don't know, created something as amazing as the World Passport and World Service for Authority and all these amazing things. Yes, great. I wonder, I'm going to ask you, how do I get one of those? But before...
All right, we'll get to that. We'll get to that a little later, okay?
Wow, that's great. Before we get to that, I mean, you have directed many films. War Without Winners, one, the Garry Davis story, and now this last one, The World is My Country. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get into directing, producing films? Was this something that you always wanted to do?
Well, I've always wanted to actually bring world peace. And many people become filmmakers because they just love movies and film. I did it because when I was a kid, I experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were in Washington, D.C. We were told to go hide under our desks. And I said, look, if you've seen the footage of Hiroshima, Washington, D.C., the whole school's not going to be here. What do you mean hide under our desks? We've got to prevent this. And I refused to get under my desk, and I was sent down to the principal's office. And, I was all through high school and so on. I went down and we were in Washington, D.C. So I went with other students down to the House of Representatives, and we lobbied to help end the Vietnam War and things like that. So I was very active for peace. And I realized I worked first for the American Friends Service Committee, which built, they had a center in Quang Ngai where they made artificial limbs for people whose legs had been blown off by mines, but mostly kids and so on. And we put together a video presentation that put together the damage that was being done to these kids with the ads of the manufacturers of these weapons that were blowing the kids' legs off, and educated people that the companies that maybe they buy many consumer products from, like Westinghouse, was making a mine that they called the leaf mine in Vietnam. It would come fluttering down, kids would jump up to play with it, it would blow their hands off. And they were, so anyway, I found that film was the most effective way to tell stories. So I began to, I took screenwriting courses, movie making courses, directing, because this is how we can get the story out to people of the vital necessity of preserving life here on planet Earth.
Out of curiosity, when you refused to hide underneath your desk and you were called to the principal's office, and you explained to him how ridiculous was that, what would he say back to you?
Well, he said, well, we don't make the rules. You just have to follow the rules, and he said, well, we have to do the best we can. I mean, I think people thought that, well, maybe it'll do something, but chances were the main thing I said we have to do is try to prevent nuclear war. And I brought a peace pilgrim to speak at our school and go from class to class and talk about her amazing journey. She walked 25,000 miles for peace, and then actually we stayed as a guest in our house. We invited her in, and I still have an old pair of shoes that she finished her journey in. So. My parents were involved in early civil rights activity before I was even born. They actually met at the Quaker Meeting House in Washington, D.C., where they were working to integrate a lunch counter, having a sit-in to integrate a lunch counter on 14th Street in Washington. So I came from a kind of an activist background and figure film is the way to do it.
Right. Okay. So you were in part influenced by your parents, but in a society where kids are thinking about the latest toys and the latest cool fashion gadgets, how come you were so enamored with fighting for peace?
Well, I guess I was considered an oddball. I remember it seemed to me, I mean, there can be no higher issue than the survival of the species. I mean, if nuclear war can eliminate us from the face of the planet, how can anything be more important than that? I guess a little like Greta today, we saw Greta, who was so concerned about the life of the planet and willing to, sail across the ocean in a boat and make a statement and talk to the UN. I mean, I felt very much as she did. She's kind of possessed by it. And I remember I went to a lot of the other kids in school, didn't understand this kind of thing. They would, well, one little story is we had a debate in the 10th grade on the Vietnam War. And my opponent, a fellow named Charles, spouted anti-communist slogans and so on. And I talked about the history of how the French had occupied Indochina, and then we took over from, when about Emperor Baudai and the Diem regime and the history, I had all the facts and figures, and the class voted unanimously that he won. And then years later, when I graduated from college and I became a conscientious objector, even as a conscientious objector, you still go through the draft board physical. So I went to the draft board physical, and he was there, and we talked about, remember, school and so on. And I said, remember that debate we had back in Mrs. Dorsey's class? And he said, I sure do. You won. So it took a few years for it to settle in for people, but in the long run, I learned the lesson that if we persevere in working for peace, we can win.
Okay, well, then you started this career. You have, according to my records, in 1978, you have the film War Without Winners. Can you tell us about that film?
Yes. Well, this was a film. Haskell Wexler was our cinematographer. He traveled across the U.S. and the Soviet Union, interviewing people from all walks of life. And we have admirals, generals, military officers, experts, but also just ordinary people on the street talking about their hopes and fears about nuclear war. And Paul Newman was our introducer to the film, and I went down to Florida to film him. He was in the middle of filming Harry and Son movie, and took the time to take a break, have me come on his houseboat, talk about what we were going to shoot, and to do this filming so that we could use that to get this film out widely across the country. And at the time, it played both on PBS stations, but also in major markets on some of the top stations across the country. So it gave people a powerful lesson about preventing nuclear war that actually helped contribute to the nuclear freeze movement.
Wow, yes, I saw some clips of it, and I was terrified seeing all these nuclear catastrophes that could happen, that have happened already as well. So it's amazing thing to see. And then, how do you discover Garry Davis? I mean, I guess he's quite famous. He wasn't famous to me, but how do you came to the conclusion that this is going to be my next subject?
Well, actually, the next subject after War Without Winners was to do the nuclear war research for the day after. And the day after, of course, 100 million Americans saw it, 200 million Soviets. Ronald Reagan credits it with convincing him that nuclear war couldn't be fought and won, as his generals were telling him, and that he had to start strategic arms limitation talks. But still, the arms race went on. I mean, here it is, 75 years now after the bomb and the creating of the UN and all that, and we're still on the edge of nuclear war. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists says we're 100 seconds from a midnight of unparalleled catastrophe. And so what happened is when I was doing the research on the day after, I began to get nuclear war nightmares. And you can wake up from an ordinary nightmare and you say, well, there aren't really boogeymen under the bed, but there was really a boogeyman under the bed and everywhere, and it could destroy us all. And so I found this kind of terrorizing me, making me feel less empowered, just sort of frozen. And then I was meditating in Quaker meeting, and it came to me that when we were kids, we learned this song, the George Fox song, and it says, you know, there's an ocean of darkness, and I drowned in the night till I came to the darkness, to the ocean of light. And the light is forever, and the light makes us free. I will dwell in the glory of the light, said he. Walk in the light wherever you may be. It goes on, walk in the light wherever you may be, etc. And I realized that, yes, there is this ocean of darkness. The deeper you dig into it, the more you learn about the facts and figures about everything, the more and more depressed you can get, and you can drown in that ocean of darkness. But simultaneously, there is an ocean of light all around us. You know, people are helping other people. There are, well, I'm, for instance, a member of Rotary, and all over the world, Rotarians are helping others and other service organizations. And we've got, you know, beautiful nature, the sun rising, you know, we've got flowers blooming, we've got an incredible, infinite ocean of light if we choose to dwell in that. And I realized that I can either dwell in that ocean of darkness and just drown in it, or I can choose to dwell in the ocean of light. And I decided I wanted to turn my efforts to creating a vision of the kind of world we want to create. That, yes, nuclear war scared the Jesus out of us, but it didn't give us a path to how do we get out of this. You know, everybody knows nuclear war is bad, but they don't see any alternative. How do we get out of this? And I thought, what we've got to do is to make films and movies that take us on a path to peace, that show us the positive alternatives, that show us a powerful, better way than war. And I began researching and putting together a plan for, you know, first like a kids show that would have futuristic, I call them astrocops, more advanced people using, peacekeepers using techniques more advanced than violence and so on. And I was working to seek funding for that when I was with Garry Davis's son. I had known about the World Passport, but I didn't know Garry had an amazing story. So we went, and he said, well, if you really want to make a movie, you know, about takes us on a peaceful path, you ought to read Garry Davis's book, My Country is the World. And it was just an incredible, you know, when I started to read it, it was just filled with, well, just so many incredible stories. This was him camping out at the UN. He was, he had so many, I read the book and I said, this is so cinematic, we've got to make a movie about this. And that's kind of what got me on the path to working on Garry's movie.
Okay, well then, since we started talking about Garry Davis, let's start with a little synopsis of his life. I mean, he was
Yes.
a dancer, and then how he goes from dancing to be such a important figure in the world peace.
Well, what happened is he was a song and dance man on Broadway, and he stood in for Danny Kaye on Broadway, got 13 curtain calls. You know, people couldn't believe this young kid could do Danny's rapid fire double talk numbers. And he was on his way to a Broadway career, offers for another show, offers for this new thing called television. You know, it was very new then. They wanted him for a show on that. But the World War II came along, and he was drafted, and he was ordered to bomb the city of Brandenburg. And his own brother was killed. And he was still heartbroken. And he said, why am I bombing and killing other people's brothers and families just because they're on the wrong side of an invisible line that I can't even see from the air? And he came back from the war, and he was pretty depressed, and he saw the Hiroshima footage, and he said, my God, what if I'm recalled into active duty to bomb Moscow in a war that could end humanity? I've got to do something. But what can I do? You know, I'm just an actor. So he ends up going to Paris, where the UN was meeting, and he offers to himself to them as a first world citizen. That picture I just showed you of him camping out at the UN. What happened is he officially gave up any national citizenship. He said, this is an act of love for America. You know, I love America, but I've got to save her. And we've got to do that by doing the same thing Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton and all those people did. They raised their allegiance from Virginia and Maryland and so on to the United States. We have to raise our allegiance to the world. And so, as an act of patriotism, really, he gave up official national citizenship and became a citizen of the world. And then of course, he was ordered to leave France. You're not allowed to be here without papers. And no other country, of course, would take him either without any documents or papers or ID. Of course, they took away his passport when he gave up American citizenship. So he noticed that the United Nations was that the Palais de Chaillot had been officially ceded to the United Nations as international territory for the course of the session. So he goes when he's supposed to leave France, he goes to the steps of the Palais de Chaillot at midnight, rolls out when he's supposed to leave, rolls out his sleeping bag and goes to sleep on the steps. Well, in the morning, a policeman, a gendarme, comes along and, "Monsieur, you can't sleep here." And he shows him his refus de séjour. He says, "Well, I'm not allowed to go back there. That's illegal for me." He said, "If you push me back into France, you'll be guilty of importing an illegal alien, and you'll go to jail." So the guy's, "I've got to get orders." So anyway, this began, a riveted war over Europe, so much media attention. Albert Camus, Albert Schweitzer, Jean-Paul Sartre, all kinds of famous intellectuals came to his defense. Einstein, became a big supporter, said incredible things about him really holding the key to grasping the key to whether humanity will die by its own hands or continue to exist. It has to be by becoming world citizens. And so this ended up, the story goes on. That's just the beginning. It gets even more dramatic and wilder as you watch the movie. And just go to theworldismycountry.com, and you'll be able to see this, incredible movie. And you'll also find a link there to get to our People Powered Planet, where each week we have a podcast talking about how do we build a better world. How do we have solutionaries? How do we dwell in that ocean of light instead of drowning in that ocean of darkness?
Right. Okay. So you discovered this story. You decided to make a film, which I shows here 2017. So what is going on now?
We made a new version for television, 58 minutes long, and we've had that playing. It's actually playing on public broadcasting stations from coast to coast. If you go to theworldismycountry.com, you'll see a link, a big button right there for public TV. You can click there to see if it's being shown, when it's been shown in your area. If it's already been shown, you can ask the station to do repeats. Quite a number of stations have done repeats. And you can also at that point sign up to see it right now. I mean, you can go ahead and get an online ticket right there and watch it right from the comfort of your home. So you go to theworldismycountry.com and you can see this incredible story.
Well, yes, I just saw. So just to so the film was released on 2017, and this is a new version for TV, a shorter version that now people can either go to the PBS TV station or they can buy it online. That's exactly the summary? Yep. Okay, perfect. Yep. Okay, so can I ask you about first of all, renouncing U.S. citizenship. So when someone renounces U.S. citizenship and still live in the United States, what are the consequences? And secondly, how does one get a world passport? You just showed me one and it looks amazing. I'm sure some of my listeners would like to get one.
Right. Well, the legal term for giving up your citizenship is renounced. Garry didn't really like the word because he said, "I'm not renouncing America. I love America, but I've got to give up national citizenship to save America." But basically, there is an official procedure, and that is that you can't give up your citizenship unless you are outside the country when you do so. So he was in Paris, of course, when he went to Paris, and that's where he went to the embassy, gave up his citizenship, and had all those amazing adventures. But then once, the adventures go on, as you see in the movie. At one point, he's stuck between France and Germany for months, living right on the borderline because neither one will let him go either way. But have you watched the movie?
I just watched some clips.
Yes. Parts of it. Okay, well, I hope you'll watch the rest of it. But anyway, so what he does is finally, they say, okay, look, we'll let you leave, cross our country if you just go back to the U.S. So he goes back to the U.S., but of course they can't admit him now. He's not a U.S. citizen, So here he's applying for immigration status. Well, where do you put your ad? He put his address, in Central Park. Well, how can you have your address in Central Park and be applying for admission? They didn't know what to do with him. He's had all kinds of adventures traveling around the world as a world citizen, and one of the cases that he had, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then the government lost the file. they couldn't figure out what to do with him because he's outside of national laws. I mean, there's no law at the global area. That's the whole point Garry was making. Murder is illegal in every country on earth, but it's not illegal outside. You get a medal for it. You get rewarded. You can go kill, bomb people, torture people, all these things. And, there's attempts to make world law or international law through treaties, but all the nations hold on to the rights to abrogate them. It's not really law if you can just violate it and there's no consequence. There's no system for, actually having courts and justice and enforcing world law. There's attempts at it with the International Criminal Court and so on, but the powerful nations don't accept that. And so Garry said, we really have to create world law. And we really need the world law that applies to everybody. And he talked about, this key question: how can we do that when everyone, we've seen all the terrible things many governments have done. We're all scared of a world government that could be oppressive. And he says, does world government scare you? It does me too. If it's the same old forces of power and money controlling our lives from behind closed doors. He says, but what if we run it? What if we find new ways to use, he said, we don't have to have in 1776, it was a fabulous idea to send people by horse and buggy to a distant city to govern for us. But he said, today we can all meet in the same room. We don't have to send a representative. We can meet in the global room. And he was inventing and thinking of systems where we could interactively, from the bottom up, be involved in creating governance for our planet, not in the old win-lose democracy way, but in a synergistic way that brings to the top the highest and best wisdom of each individual and helps amalgamate that into the will of the people of the whole. And, every constitution, the Declaration of Independence says it is the right of the people to institute new government. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that it's the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government, and almost every constitution says the same thing. So he said, well, if we the people, create it, then why are we knocking our heads against the wall, begging and pleading with government leaders to make peace when they can't do it? They're on the wrong civic level. Their loyalty is to the part, not the whole. And he said, why don't we the people just use this incredible genius of humanity, our incredible inventiveness, to invent a whole new interactive system where we can all be involved in expressing our the will. There's no right way that right now there's no way that we can express our will at the global level. There's nobody. You don't vote for any world parliament. You don't have any input. We need to express the will of the people at the global level, and that can be a powerful force once we bring to the top, the best of our will and what we want to do, not the race to the bottom.
Okay, well, there are many people. In fact, I could say there are thousands, if not millions of people who have similar arguments, like corporations are taking our life, the 1%, the world wealth could be more evenly distributed, et cetera, and none of these people get to be as notorious or listen, or not too many people listen to them. They are just put aside as another idealist. So in a world without internet and social media, how come Garry Davis got so much attention? What was it about him? Because the arguments are not new. These arguments, if I step outside my neighborhood, someone will say something similar to that.
Well, what Garry did, the key was that Garry was an actor and he was willing to act. And so, for example, after he'd been camping out at the UN, and then he was finally, 100 gendarmes descend on his tent camping out at the UN, and they take him away, but they still don't know what to do with him. He ends up with Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, all these other top famous intellectuals, Simone de Beauvoir, they end up sneaking in and pulling off this grand act of political theater right at the United Nations. He leaps up in the middle of the session and he says, "The nations you represent divide us and lead us to the brink of total war." And he calls on them to hold elections for a government of, by, and for the people of the planet. And he says, if you won't do it, step aside and a People's World Assembly will arise from our ranks to do it. Well, this kind of riveted war in Europe, and he got so much press and media. In fact, we've got, if you watch the film, we have incredible footage showing almost every step of his journey. And I think part of it was because he was a showman, because he was a Broadway person. His father was head of the Garry Davis orchestra that played for 11 different presidents, played for high society. He knew how to get to the press and get to media, and he knew how to pull off these grand acts that caught attention. I mean, how many times does somebody leap up in the middle of a United Nations session? And I mean, Greta's talked to the UN, but she didn't go interrupt the UN to do it. She spoke at a kind of a panel on the side, but he actually, went right in there and talked to the world leaders. And amazingly, when you watch the film, you'll see they start applauding him. But still, of course, he's subdued. And well, Albert Camus tells an interesting story about being locked up in a sort of jail at the UN for the night. I mean, how Pierre Berger in the film talks about how he was locked up with Albert Camus and the experiences they had, because they were part of this interruption he did. It wasn't just him; it was these famous people. That's why also the press couldn't ignore it. He had other people aligned with him. So yeah, it was quite a story, and it went on. This was just the beginning. I mean, the other dramatic thing was on December 9th, where they held a rally at the huge velodrome. It was like the Madison Square Garden of Paris, and 20,000 people were demanding that the UN recognize the rights of humanity. And that was December 9th, 1948. The very next day, the Soviet Union, which had been adamantly objecting to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as an intrusion on their national sovereignty, they stepped aside and let it get passed unanimously. And that's, of course, a fundamental document for all of us in the world. For the first time, all the nations of the world recognize that all human beings have rights and freedoms, inalienable rights. And now we, the people, have to come and claim those rights and stand up for the reality that we are the sovereigns of our planet.
Well, it is indeed an amazing story. I went on to read that he created the World Citizen Party, that he ran for mayor of Washington, D.C., and then he ran in 1988 for U.S. president. So it's a long way from being an actor to trying to be, well, I mean, Ronald Reagan did it. So it's not a long way. But how does, my last question, how does one get a passport?
Yes, well, if you go to theworldismycountry.com, you'll see right at the top a passport link, and that'll take you to a page that tells you about the World Passport and links you to the World Service Authority, which is the organization right in Washington, D.C. at 5 Thomas Circle that's been issuing World Passport, World IDs, World Marriage Licenses, all based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And while at the present time, very few nations will admit you with this. In the past, there's been 173 of the world, or 184 of the world's 193 nations in the UN stamped it, put visas in it at one time or another, and so it's been it's had a major impact. But the main impact it has now is just as an identity document for stateless people. You can see a couple of the visas I have in mind.
Right.
It's mainly an identity document that, for instance, if somebody gets into the U.S. asking for asylum, they can't even get into the courthouse without an ID. So some of the immigration lawyers in Washington, D.C. will send their clients down to the World Service Authority and ask them to to issue a world passport so they can just get into the courthouse and have their case heard. And around the world, so many parents can't get an education for their children. They can't get medical care. They can't get all kinds of other things that they don't have an identity. You need an ID card for all that stuff. So this has been a vital identity for the 50 million people in the world who are stateless, who don't have any identity, either because they're, sometimes their governments disappeared when when the Soviet Union crumbled, certain governments are no longer there, or things have changed. Anyway, there's all kinds of reasons why people are stateless, mostly wars that have forced them out, but also environmental damage and created environmental refugees and others. So it's a vital document, but for those of us who don't need it for that, it's just an incredible symbol of our connection to humanity as a whole. It's worth having just so you can say, yeah, I'm a world citizen and I've got the passport to prove it.
Right. Okay. So, Arthur, this is an incredible story. So where can, tell us one more time, where can the listeners go to watch the movie on the different TV stations?
Well, again, if you go to theworldismycountry.com, you'll see right on the first page, public television, a link right there. You click on that and it lists the stations, the time, show times, and so on. Or you can check with your local station and ask, when they'll show it.
Okay, and because it's PBS, it's completely free for those who haven't seen it yet, right?
Right.
Perfect. Well, Arthur, this is amazing. Thank you so much for time. This an incredible story.
Okay, well, thank you, and I hope you'll watch the film and send me an email about what you think of it.